I'm here to tell you about the future of humans and technology. First, thank you so much to everybody who has organized Fractal 11, especially Hernan and Vivian. It's been an amazing time to be able to come down here and be able to talk and share ideas. I'm going to talk about cyborg anthropology and the evaporation of the interface. So first, I'd like to tell you that all of you in this audience are cyborgs. Now, generally, when you think of a cyborg, maybe you think about Terminator or somebody with implants or a giant machine. But the thing is that every time you interface with a piece of technology through your eyes or through your vision, you are a low-tech cyborg. You are interacting with technology a little bit of the time, and therefore you're part technology, part human. So what is the definition of a cyborg? The definition was founded in 1960 in a paper on cyborgs in space. And the traditional definition is an organism to which exogenous components have been added for the purpose of adapting to new ambient spaces. Well, what does this mean? It means that an astronaut who goes into space is an organism, a human being, who adds all these strange components onto themselves so that they can survive in a new and hostile environment. So space travel was the first real cyborgs that we saw, adding all these prosthetics in order to be something new. No longer was the space person just a human, they were something more. They were able to adapt within a few years to be able to go into space instead of waiting to evolve so that they could breathe in space. There's a difference between the tools that we have evolved over time and the tools that we have now. The first tools were, say, a hammer as an extension of a fist, so that things could be hit harder, or a knife, so you could tear apart something more easily. But these tools were mostly physical extensions. Now we see that there are tools that are mental extensions now. For instance, when you use a telephone, you're storing some of your information and your persona in this device. And that's traveling across the world and interacting with something else. You're extending your mental self across a great distance. And so the difference between the prosthetic devices that we had all throughout history and the devices that we have now increasingly are that they're prosthetics for the mental self. Maureen McHugh is a science fiction author, and she said that soon perhaps it will be impossible to tell where humans end and machines begin. Your online profile, for instance, is an extension of you, and sometimes people interact with it when you're not even there. So we'll talk about this more a little bit later. So what is traditional anthropology? A traditional anthropologist goes out, usually to another place, and says, look at these curious people, look at all of their different technologies, how strange they are, how curious they are. And then they write a paper and they go back to their country and they say, oh, these are very strange people, blah, blah, blah. And it's not read by a general public, right? But the thing is that with cyborg anthropology, you look at your own world around you and you say, how strange these people are around me, how strange all these cell phone devices are, how curious all these tools, the fact that we wake up next to our cell phones and that we have to plug them in and take care of them and buy more of them again and again. It's a new way of looking at the world around you to understand, how everybody is changing over time with these tiny little devices that live in our pockets. So where did cyborg anthropology come from? Well, in 1941, there started to be these meetings, and they called them the Macy Conferences. It was a number of scientists and anthropologists who got together, and they realized that technology was becoming, or going to become, a very important part of human culture. It was going to change everything. And they said, we need to talk about how technology will affect humans. And so they started these meetings. In 1992, a subsection of the anthropology of science was developed called cyborg anthropology, which said that now technology is such a part of our life that we can no longer ignore it, and we have to study it alongside humans if we want to get anywhere in understanding how technology will affect us in the future. So what is cyborg anthropology applied to right now? So it's applied to how the boundaries between humans and tech are blurring. About privacy, identity, connectivity, about mobile technology. Intel has a whole group of anthropologists whose job is to exclusively study mobile telephones and go around to other countries and see how they affect people. Digital phenomenology. What is it like to live online? What is it like to have a social network and a profile that can interact for you when you're not even there? What about information retrieval and dispersal? How do you get information? Information is stored in the air, and we have our devices, and we get it. It's incredible. The cell phones have turned us into superhumans, but it's a very normal thing now because we're all very used to it. It's part of our everyday life, so it's hard to say, I'm going to look at this for what it is. And that is what cyborg anthropology helps people do. The other thing is the physiological effects of technology on your brain. What's actually happening with all this information that we have all the time. So this speech will cover four parts. First, what it's like to live today. Second, what it's like to become a cyborg. Third, the history of the future, how we actually got here. And then four, some wacky predictions about what the future might be like. So here's in the present day. If you think of whenever you store a file in a device, like a computer or a mobile phone, every time you store something, there's unlimited space. A new piece of space opens up. If you have a room, like just a regular bedroom, and you say, I'm going to buy a bunch of beds and put it in this room, you can only fit maybe 10 beds in that room. But if you have a mobile device and you say, I want to fit 20,000 pictures in this room over 8 years, your device doesn't get heavier. Your phone doesn't get heavier no matter how much information you put into it. This is the big difference between physical technology and mental technology. It doesn't expand with information. So what happens if you take all of those photos for 8 years and you print them out? There was a company that did this. It was a campaign for a hard drive storage. They printed out 8 years of somebody's photos from one laptop. So if you've taken any photos, this is what the inside of your computer looks like. And you carry this around every day and you don't notice it. But this is what it looks like. So here's the other thing that happens. If you start to store your information online, it starts to become mapped to your brain. You start to use your computer as an external brain, and suddenly when you use your email account, you start storing memories in email. You start storing memories in documents. And suddenly you start storing memories online. If you say to somebody at a party, I saw this great YouTube video, let me pull it up for you. And you pull up the YouTube video, that's a hyperlinked memory. It's not in your mind, it's out on the internet, and you can share it by linking to something. The problem with hyperlinked memories is that you can't just collect them very easily. So what ends up happening is all of us become these paleontologists. We go into our computer and we say, oh no, where did I leave that file? And we start digging through. We've lost some information. We have all this email piling on top of email, and we don't know where it went anymore. So it's this very intense effect of this new technology that we're all these very strange creatures that collect lots of information and then lose it because there's so much of it, and then have to hunt through it and make sure that it's tagged correctly. It functions just like our memories, but we sometimes forget what those memories are called. There's I call it panic architecture. When there's too much email coming in and you can't handle it all and there's too much information and you start to panic a little bit. There have been studies done on email about how people stop breathing when they check their email because it's stressful. In the wild, in nature, it's like being face to face with all sorts of animals and lions. It's all these people trying to get your attention at once. It's impossible to deal with. So physiologically, so that's panic architecture. So what about when you are on the go with your phone and you're trying to interact with a bunch of friends, but then you have somebody who's texting you all the time and you're trying to finish an email? This is the idea of social punctuation. You have all of this information and all of these social interactions, and then you keep getting interrupted by all this different technology. You have to pay attention to it all the time. So here are some discontents about cell phones. Sigmund Freud wrote this book called Civilization and Its Discontents. And he said, in the future, we might have all these external devices, and they might wear out and cause us a lot of trouble. And I think that that's happened. Because if you don't upgrade your cell phone, you end up getting made fun of. and no one can carry this around in a bag. So you have to keep, as a human, as a cyborg, upgrading your technology again and again and again in order to interact with the world around you. That keeps increasing the technology again and again. One of the other problems is whenever you get rid of a cell phone every year or two, the cell phone doesn't live that long. As a human, you live maybe 80 years. Your cell phones have a life of 1 or 2 years. That's less than a pet. And so you have to get rid of it. And where does it go? It just goes into piles and piles of cell phones, right? Now, if you think about trees, when it's fall, the tree has its leaves fall to the ground, and those leaves make room for new trees and fertilize the ground. But when we get rid of our cell phones, they don't really make room for, I guess they make room for more cell phones, but they don't do anything great to help more, trees grow. It's kind of a waste. We're a very strange species like this. So another concept I'd like to talk about is the evolution of the cell phone. When the first telephones came out, it was very strange. People thought that somebody who used a phone was schizophrenic. They said, oh, you're using a phone. You're going in a closed room and you're talking to a box. You are crazy. Who would ever use a phone, right? But over time, using a telephone became extremely normal. And then the cell phone got untethered from its cord and started to walk around with you. So instead of having to be in one room with your phone, you got to walk around the city with a phone. The only problem is that as a cell phone user, now you have to temporarily negotiate a space in order to take a call. So you have to say, oh, I don't have any private space anymore because my phone's no longer in my house, and so I have to stop on the side of the street and take a phone call, and everybody else can hear my conversation.